John Brown's body lies a-mouldering in the grave, while weep the sons of bondage whom he ventured all to save. But though he sleeps, his life was lost while struggling for the slave. His soul is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory,
Welcome to War of the Rebellion, Stories of the Civil War. I am your host, Leon, and this is a reading of History of the 72nd Indiana Volunteer Infantry of the Mounted Lightning Brigade. A faithful record of the life, service, and suffering of the rank and file of the regiment on the march, in camp, in battle, and in prison, especially devoted to giving the reader a definite knowledge of the service of the common soldier, with an appendix containing a complete roster of officers and men. Written and compiled by B.F. McGee, Sergeant of Company I, Regimental Historian. Edited by William R. Jewell, Lieutenant of Company G. Introduction by Colonel Thompson. The 72nd Regiment Indiana Volunteers made a history in their 3 years' service, of which every member is justly proud, and the recollection of having faithfully performed every duty to make the regiment so efficient is the highest reward of the gallant soldier can wish. During the service, while in camp, on the march, and on the battlefield, a number of soldiers kept a diary, carefully noting down events as they transpired, for the benefit of their friends and posterity, little thinking of the importance of their notebooks for compiling a history of the regiment to be published in book form. For years, our faithful historian, Sergeant McGee, has been collecting this material and arranging it for publication, and with the aid of Comrade Jewell, now presents the book with the hope that it will fully meet the expectations of the friends of the regiment. Every possible effort has been made to secure something from every comrade of the regiment, in the way of personal incidents, reminiscence, etc., that it might be truly a soldier's history, interesting to every member of the regiment, and to the friends of those who have passed away. The historian, having been of the ranks, and faithfully carrying his gun and knapsack throughout the entire service, and depending largely upon the diaries of private soldiers for material for the history, it will present army life from the standpoint of the common soldiery, and perhaps contains more of real war history than any other book published. No one realizes the labor and expense it has been to prepare and publish this book, and the faithful historian will never be compensated, unless it may be in that highest reward, the consciousness of having done his duty. I know not what is in the book, having read but a few pages of proof slips, but an intimate acquaintance with Sergeant McGee during the service, and since the close of the war, assures me it is a faithful collection of actual regimental history, such as surviving comrades and friends of the regiment will wish to keep in their libraries and hand down to future generations. And I most earnestly commend it with the hope that his faithful service in preparing it will be appreciated. Very truly, C.G. Thompson. History of the 72nd Regiment. Chapter 1. Cause of the War. While there were many minor causes of the war, there was but one great cause: African slavery. Early in the history of the country, there arose a conflict between the free and the slave states. Honorable John C. Calhoun taught the doctrine of state sovereignty, that each state was supreme sovereign over its own territory, to the exclusion of the authority of even the United States. In the heated contests of the period, South Carolina passed resolutions of nullification and secession as early as 1828, in which it was elaborately set forth that a sovereign state had the right to annul a law of Congress, or to secede from the Union, if its people so determined. General Jackson, then President of the United States, issued his celebrated proclamation in 1832, in which he plainly told the people of South Carolina that he would use the military power of the United States government to compel obedience to the laws of Congress and to preserve the Union, and that he would meet secession by coercion. President Jackson also embodied in this proclamation a constitutional argument for the sovereignty and perpetuity of the Union, which has never been surpassed, if indeed ever equaled. The President prevailed, and the nullification and disunion projects of South Carolina were, for the time, deferred. But the baneful doctrines were not abandoned. As time passed, the conflict between slavery and the free states, in efforts to obtain territory for new states, became very fierce. The Union doctrine of Jackson spread and strengthened in the northern free states, while the secession doctrines of Calhoun were generally received in the South. From 1828 to 1861, there were frequent threats of secession. The contest over the admission of Kansas into the Union intensely excited both the North and South, and threats of disunion came more emphatic from the slave states. All the efforts of the wisest men failed to pacify. The presidential contest of 1860 was the most remarkable in the history of the country. The Republicans nominated Abraham Lincoln. The Democratic Party divided. The Union wing nominated Stephen A. Douglas, a Jacksonian Democrat, of fame and ability, who held the Union dearer than his political success or his own life. The Calhoun secessionists would not support Mr. Douglas, and nominated John C. Breckinridge, a rabid secessionist. The canvass was bitter, especially in the southern states, where the supporters of Lincoln and Douglas were nearly equally obnoxious. Many outrages were committed in the South during this canvass, in which both Union men and women suffered severely, often losing their lives. The secessionists declared, from first to last, that if Lincoln should be elected, the southern states would secede from the Union in a body. Union men, Republicans, Democrats, and old Whigs thought this but a frenzied repetition of an old threat, and an effort of the minority to gain by bullying what they could not gain by votes. Every man went right on and voted the ticket he preferred. The result was the election of Abraham Lincoln. As soon as it was known that Mr. Lincoln was elected, South Carolina, the hotbed of disunion sentiment and treasonable plots, proceeded openly to make preparations to secede from the Union. How rapidly these preparations were pushed, how wildly and widely the fires of secession spread, we have no space here to detail. By the 4th of March, 1861, 7 states had passed secession ordinances and formed an independent government, called the Confederate States of America, had adopted a constitution, elected a president and vice president, and set in motion all the machinery of government. This was the state of things when Mr. Lincoln, escaping the bloody villains who lay in wait to take his life, arrived in Washington and was inaugurated. In his inaugural address, Mr. Lincoln clearly announced that he had no desire to interfere with slavery where it was then existing, and no power to do so if he had the desire. He spoke in a spirit of reconciliation, yet was quite distinct in declaring that he would enforce the laws of the United States in all the states. Most prominent among the distinguished men present at that inauguration was his great but magnanimous political rival, Stephen A. Douglas. As soon as the president had concluded his address, Mr. Douglas extended to him his hand, and assured him of his sympathy and support in efforts to preserve the Union. Floyd, Secretary of War under Buchanan, a rank rebel, while acting under a solemn oath to preserve and defend the Union from all foes, dispersed the Navy, transferred most of the arms, troops, and munitions of war to the southern states, where the troops were surrounded by rebel officers as soon as the war broke out, or virtually before, and all the arms and forts seized, except Fort Sumter. Thus Mr. Lincoln found a rebel government established, with about all the arms and troops of the United States at its command, and actually making war upon the United States authorities. The cause of the war was unquestionably slavery. The object of the war was simply to put down the rebellion, not to abolish slavery, but to put down treason. The slavocrats believed that the spread of slavery in the territories yet to become states had become an impossibility if they remained in the Union, for the free states had gained control of the government. They hence determined to secede from the Union, make slavery a perpetual institution in their new government, acquire all the territory possible, and spread slavery to its utmost limits. In the progress of the war, the emancipation of almost 4 million slaves became a military necessity. It was early seen that the rebels were using their slaves to aid them in the war against the Union. President Lincoln was urged repeatedly to make proclamation that all slaves of rebels should be free. He had great caution and patience, and waited until to wait longer seemed useless. He issued his first proclamation 100 days before New Year's, 1863, in which he stated that on January 1st, 1863, he would issue another proclamation, declaring the slaves in all the states, or parts of states, free after that date. The proclamation was issued, and it will shine as a fadeless star of liberty on the earth forever. Chapter 2. From 1860 to 1862. Progress of the war to the date of enlistment of the 72nd. On January 9th, 1860, the steamer Star of the West was sent with reinforcements and supplies for Major Anderson, who was holding Fort Sumter with a small force. When the steamer, flying the United States colors, attempted to land at the fort, she was fired on by rebel troops and forced to retire, without effecting her purpose. This, perhaps, was the first hostile shot at the flag. No more were fired until the 12th of April, 1861, when the rebels, hearing that a fleet was sailing to the relief of Sumter, opened fire on the fort by the order of the rebel government. And on the next day, its brave commander and garrison, being able to hold out no longer, surrendered. The insult to the flag, and the fall of this fort, ran like mad fire through the North, exciting intense indignation. In the South, it was hailed with wild delight by the ringing of bells, firing of guns, bonfires, and other extravagant manifestations of joy. It had directly opposite effects in the two sections. In the South, it intoxicated the rebels with enthusiasm, and they believed the war would speedily terminate in their favor. Some actually thought that it had been decided, and the Yankees would make no further resistance. It hastened the secession of other states, and stimulated the volunteering of rebel troops. The gallant Southrons were anxious to be in at the defeat and death of the Northern mudsills. In the Northern states, the attack on Sumter convinced the people that war was inevitable, and they resolved that as the rebels, in their foolhardiness, would accept nothing else, they should have war to the knife, and the knife to the hilt. On April 15, 1861, President Lincoln made his first call for 75,000 militia, to suppress the insurrection, as he mildly termed it. and also called an extra session of Congress to convene on the next 4th of July to provide ways and means for the war. Another proclamation was issued on the 19th of April, blockading the ports of the rebellious states. Other determined war measures were speedily adopted. The fight was on. It was sure to be fierce and bloody, but no one could tell how long. It had been remarked that when Lincoln was inaugurated, Douglas was present, and offered his assistance in that portentous hour. It was the act of a magnanimous man and pure patriot, and was accepted by the President in the spirit it was proffered, and with thanks for the wisdom and influence of such a man in such an emergency. On May 1st, 1861, while all the country was in a tumult, and when even some Northern men were halting as to the policy of making war on the South, and some even doubting even the constitutionality of it, and thinking that compromise measures might yet be adopted, Judge Douglas spoke in Chicago. The speech sounded like the keynote of patriotism. It was able, uncompromising, convincing, and Jacksonian in every sentence. "The Union, it must be and shall be preserved," said Mr. Douglas. "And in this contest, every man must be for the United States or against it. There can be no neutrals in this war, only patriots and traitors." This speech consolidated patriotic Democrats and Republicans. Party lines disappeared, except with persons who were actually rebels at heart. Lincoln and Douglas were on the same side, and so were the people of the North, with the exceptions named. Let the memory of Stephen A. Douglas, the little giant, be ever green and glorious, and let the immortals forever wreath his brow. Not only great, but a true patriot was he, whose country was his first and last love. No state in the Union was more thoroughly aroused than Indiana. No governor in the nation was more prompt in offering troops to the president than Governor Morton. On April 15th, immediately on the reception of the news of the fall of Sumter, he telegraphed to the president, "On behalf of the state of Indiana, I tender to you, for the defense of the nation and to uphold the authority of the government, 10,000 men." That tender was made on the very day that the president issued his call for 75,000 men. It is but one of hundreds of proofs of the fact that from the very first Governor Morton had a clear comprehension of the magnitude of the war, and of the necessity of meeting the rebels promptly and with large bodies of troops. The day after the call for troops was made, April 16th, 500 men were in camp at the fairgrounds, Camp Morton, at Indianapolis, and were coming like a tide. From morning until night were seen columns of men marching the streets from the cars to camp. Colors flying, drums throbbing, fifes screeching. When night came, the stream was not broken, and in less than 7 days from the call, 12,000 men were in camp, almost 3 times the quota of Indiana, and the cry was, "Still they come." As Adjutant Noble in his report says, the question was not who will go, but who will be allowed to go. In 5 days, after the tender of 10,000 men, made by Governor Morton, he tendered the government 6 more regiments, without condition as to term of service, to be raised within 6 days after accepted. So fully impressed was the great war governor that the troops would be needed, that, not getting a reply from the War Department, he took the responsibility of organizing, drilling, equipping, and holding the troops ready at the call of the government. The patriotic men who were anxious to enter the service were as much gratified at this wise act of their governor as was President Lincoln. But of course, we cannot follow the movements and fortunes of the Indiana troops. Having said enough to show that the state met the great crisis with a bold and ready spirit, we must hasten to put our own regiment in the field. the 3 months' troops from Indiana made a splendid record, and were almost all war skirmishes in which the rebels were defeated. The defeat of the Army of the Potomac at Bull Run in 1861 startled, thrilled, and chilled the country, and no state felt it more keenly than Indiana and her noble governor. Meetings were held, and speeches made by the ablest men in every neighborhood, town, and city. The people were now more fully informed as to the magnitude of the war, and given plainly to understand that it might require years instead of months to crush the rebellion. Many of the most ardent Union men had supposed, before this terrible defeat, that a few thousand men from each loyal state could flog out the rebels in a jiffy, as the expression went, and the time had come to undeceive this confidence, and let the people know that it was Greek meeting Greek, that though our enemy was erratic, he was strong, full of desperate courage, and now in the flush of victory would be more troublesome to subdue than ever before. From the date of the first Bull Run defeat, the war took on a more serious and permanent aspect. Governor Morton, ever keen of foresight, vigorous and prompt of action, sent messengers to all the 3 months' Indiana regiments, whose time was about to expire, and exhorted officers and men to retain their organizations by re-enlistment as soon as their term of service was out. He was successful, and the regiments were speedily reorganized. Most of the officers and men enlisting for 3 years, and the second call of the president was virtually met by Indiana in advance, a large number of the regiments having the advantage of a 3 months' active service in the field. During the first 4 months of 1862, the Union forces gained many important victories as Mill Spring, Fort Donelson, Pea Ridge, and others. The terrible Battle of Shiloh was simply a repulse of the enemy at a heavy loss to the Union troops. By midsummer, our troops had been so wasted by war and sickness that General Buell was in full retreat from the heart of the South to the Ohio River. The Army of the Potomac was driven staggering back from its lines before Richmond, and the year that had opened so full of promise for the Union cause was clouded before half gone. And President Lincoln called for 300,000 more. This is the call that caught the 72nd Indiana, and brought out some of the best troops who served during the war. We do not mean braver men, but men more advanced in years and settled in the business of life. It was a proverb during recruiting under this call, often repeated. The boys have been going to the war. Now, the men are going to help them. And we are going to end right there. We're going to save chapter 3 for next week. Let's get into some notes. This is great. The opening introduction, Colonel Thompson telling us, it was great. Just he gave his seal of approval, and I love that he didn't even read it when he gave us his seal of approval. He was like, I know these guys. This is great. Something I immediately wrote down is also the cause of the war. I'm telling you, these veterans can accurately describe all of the events leading up to it that even modern audiences can just immediately digest. I love that. The cause of the war, as he put it, but one great cause, African slavery. Couldn't agree more. There's lots of little things that can be added as part of that, but the great cause of this war was slavery. I also noticed a lot of pro-Jackson and Jacksonian politics in a very favorable light, as well as some other Democrats. That's not something we've seen too much of in what we've read, so it's very nice to see it here, just as a perspective viewpoint. I appreciate it. And also, right after this, he talks about the Secretary of War transferring weapons and ammo and powder and such to the states. That really happened. The 155th talk about it in their book, where they tried to transfer cannons and powder and shells out of the armory in Pittsburgh. So, And they were able to stop it from happening just by general outcry and because they knew Buchanan. So, very well written. I also really appreciate this. I wish I could plaster it everywhere. That he says that the war was unquestionably about slavery. And that the fighting started to put down the rebellion. That the aristocrats of the South wanted to expand slavery as far as they could. And that the slaves were freed. The Emancipation Proclamation, Lincoln's big fear, was trying to balance the states that were still in the Union and their wants and needs. I mean, it takes a lot. Like, he's one of the reasons why he's such a great president is because of how he was able to hold all of this together. On chapter 2, the only thing I wrote was, damn, Indiana. You folks should all be proud of the amount of soldiers we're just getting pumped out of that state. You were like building regiments like Legos, it sounds like. But we've kind of also heard this story before. The 155th Pennsylvania Regiment also talks about getting sucked into that 300,000 men call for the rebellion, and that those troops were a special type of soldier. So, and they were also convinced that they were part of the best of the regiments raised to fight the war, which is, it's adorable, right? So I like that. But that's all I had for chapter 2, was just kind of some of the same stuff we've gone over. I didn't feel like repeating myself again. I know you guys already have to bear with that. So, my friends, that is the end of this episode. Thank you for listening. I have a couple of announcements if you would like to stay around and listen for a moment. The War of the Rebellion has a TikTok. We have YouTube Shorts. We've got the YouTube channel. I recently released a very short mod review for an American Civil War mod for Napoleon Total War. Please come check that out. That's on the YouTube channel. And very, very soon, I have a huge surprise for you guys. I am super excited to share with you guys. I have been wanting to talk about it for weeks and weeks and weeks. I haven't been able to. So get ready. It's going to be a hopefully world premiere this weekend. Or maybe a little before that. I'm not too sure on the details, but stand by. Something coming down the pipe this weekend that's very exciting. So, all right, my friends, come check out the website, of course, the YouTube channel. If you can come find me on TikTok, by all means, you can friend me, like me, whatever. I just post some stuff from the readings that I do, just in TikTok format. So that's all that is. But all right. I will see you guys in the next episode. Have a great one, and I'll see you on the front lines. Bye-bye now.
Old John Brown's body lies a-mouldering in the grave, while weep the sons of bondage whom he ventured all to save. But though he sleeps, his life was lost while struggling for the slave. His soul is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. For his soul is marching on. John Brown was a hero, undaunted, true, and brave. And Kansas knew his valor when he fought her rights to save. And now, though the grass grows green above his grave, his soul is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Hallelujah, for his soul is marching on. He captured Harper's Ferry with his 19 men so few. slew, and frightened old Virginia till she trembled through and through. They hung him for a traitor, themselves a traitorous crew, but his soul is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. For his soul is marching on. John Brown was John the Baptist, of the Christ we are to see. Christ who of the bondman shall the liberator be. And soon throughout the sunny South the slaves shall all be free, for his soul is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Hallelujah, for his soul is marching on. The conflict that he heralded, he looked from heaven to view on the army of the Union with its flag red, white, and blue. And heaven shall sing with anthems o'er the deed they mean to do, for his soul is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. For his soul is marching on. Soldiers of freedom, then strike while strike ye may, the death blow of oppression in a better time and way. The dawn of old John Brown has brightened into day, and his soul is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Hallelujah, for his soul is marching